Welcome to everyone joining us. And thank you for your interest in this webinar on digital transition and homelessness. We believe that digital exclusion that many people in homelessness experience can have dramatic consequences in access to rights, and therefore this subject is becoming a very important issue. And it is expected that it will be even more relevant in the future, considering how societies are becoming more digitalized. So it's good that we have so much interest coming from your side. And at the European level, several strategies have been put forward regarding this topic, notably the 2030 Digital Compass of March 2021. And last week, we heard that the Council of the European Union agreed on a position for the Declaration of Digital Rights and Principles, paving the way to its signature by the Commission, the Parliament, and the Council in December. And one of the 6 key areas of this declaration, it is actually the solidarity and inclusion. Nevertheless, we believe that there is still room for more ambition regarding digital inclusion, both at European and national levels. And given this context, we hope this webinar will be useful to improve our knowledge and to raise awareness about this topic. And that is why I'm very happy to introduce the speakers that will have the chance to present their work today. Firstly, we'll have David Lowitz from the Berlin University of Arts, who will introduce a topic presenting academic research. Secondly, we will hear from the work of homeless service providers regarding digital inclusion. And I am happy to introduce Alice de Ronde from Solinum in France, Elina van der Born from the Regenboog Group in the Netherlands, and finally Dan Vink and Daniel Ciancio from HOVO in Brussels. And finally, we will have experts working at European level who will join us for a discussion on digital exclusion with the participation of Benjamin Ignac, a public policy expert on technology and human rights, Elisa Lironi from European Citizen Action Service, who also led the work of the digital cluster of the Civil Society Convention on the Future of Europe, and Claire Fernandez, who is the Director of European Digital Rights. And yeah, without further ado, I think that all the round of introductions were made. I am very happy to introduce now David. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Let me share my presentation. All right, can you see that? Great, so thank you for the invitation. I'm really excited to be speaking here, and I'm excited to be speaking to so many practitioners especially, and I'm going to try and maybe set the frame on digital needs and support for people in homelessness. When I speak about people in homelessness, or forgive me, homeless people, I'm still used to that. I'm like trying to rejig my language. Then I'm speaking about the people who fall under the ethos light categorization of FEANTSA. So that can mean anything between people living rough and also people living in non-conventional dwellings, people living in different kinds of institutions, basically people living in some kind of housing precarity. To give you some background on what I'm doing, I'm working as part of a research project. We've been going for the last 3 years, and we've been doing ethnography on the digital media usage of people experiencing homelessness in Berlin, as well as doing a survey. And I'm mostly going to be focusing on the survey. However, I'm also going to be talking about how we ethnographically worked with some digital solutions that were offered up during the pandemic or as a result of the pandemic. And as you all know, smartphones and digital media are becoming a precondition for taking part in societal life. And for some groups, there's more of a danger to not have the access to that kind of media. And this may or may not include homeless people. There's a lot of research on whether or not homeless people have this kind of what scientists call access divide, own less smartphones, or like have like a lower percentage of smartphone users as opposed to people who are housed. As of 2019, there's not really a clear picture on this, which mostly results from the fact that this is really difficult to study. There are difficulties with the science of it all, but from speaking to people for the last 3 years in Berlin, it was very clear to us that access to digital media is an issue that greatly concerns many homeless people, and I'm sure you can all speak to that. So to kind of find out about the challenges that people are facing, we developed a survey in an iterative process together with homeless people. And we carried it out in 5 day centers for homeless people in Berlin with 141 participants. We chose day centers just so that you could have people kind of experiencing all different types of homelessness, because a lot of them do come to the day centers. It's not really tied to where you sleep or your housing status. It's not a representative study, and I would always be cautious of people saying that they're carrying out a representative study of homeless people, because it's such a diverse group of people. And it was carried out in a lot of different languages, and 10 euros were given for the participation as a thank you. These are some pictures from the survey. The picture on the right, I think, is to me one of the most interesting things I've seen in my research. That device, the person who did own it was not happy with the fact that she wasn't receiving all of the channels anymore. So as it got to smartphone ownership, 59% of people in our survey said that they did own a smartphone, 41% of people said they didn't, and that compares somewhat unfavorably to the general German population. However, this is not really the main thrust of our research. Actually, what we find much more interesting is the question on the right: did you use the internet or any digital device in the last year? And to that question, 86% people answered yes. So there is a very significant divide between people who are using the internet, who are using digital devices, and who currently have ownership of a digital device. And so that's kind of where we were like, oh, so it's not just about who has a smartphone right now, and that number doesn't tell us everything. So we try to look into the challenges that people experience owning smartphones or owning digital devices. Most of the people that we spoke to got their devices while they were homeless. It was a mix out of buying it new, buying it used, getting it donated. Also, if you hear some noises, I'm sorry, that's my dog. And getting it gifted. About 30% of the people that we spoke to didn't pay anything for it. And then the rest, it was kind of a wild mix, peaking at around 100 to 150 euros in what they paid for their phones. Most of them used Wi-Fi, a lot of them public transport, the kind of free Berlin Wi-Fi, Wi-Fi in NGOs, charities, and in shops. Two things where we thought that this was going to be a really, like, kind of, that people were going to say, oh, this is really difficult, was how difficult is charging a phone, and how difficult is buying a SIM card in Germany, because there's a registration process, which I think in multiple European countries you have this, where you have to kind of present an ID to get a SIM card. However, we had more of a mixed bag of results. We're doing some correlations right now, and we're finding that, for example, with the charging, obviously the kind of homelessness that you experience really impacts whether or not you think that's a difficult thing for you. But also the duration of homelessness. So people who are sleeping rough, if they've been homeless for a longer period of time, they likely know where to charge their devices. With buying a SIM card, it's also kind of a thing of like, how well connected are you? Do you know where you can get a SIM card without registration? But ultimately, this wasn't kind of the difficulty that we thought it was maybe going to be at the extent it was going to be. What we did find as the most pervasive issue in our survey, but also in our ethnographic research, so just speaking to people, is smartphone loss. And so also, sorry, my dog is now joining this call. Smartphone loss, including loss, theft, the phone breaking, etc. So if the number keeps changing of people who answer this question, it's because we filtered the questions. If you didn't have a smartphone, we didn't ask you whether or not you lost one, or if you hadn't had a smartphone in the last 12 months. So only 28% of the people that we spoke to did not lose any smartphone in the last year. That means that almost 70% or over 70% of people that we spoke to had lost at least one smartphone in the last year. That is wild. That is so wild that when you look at the UK, where the Office of National Statistics publishes a number on on the percentage of individuals that experience phone theft, which isn't quite the same thing, but at least adjacent, it's 0.7% in the general population. That is a very big difference, right? And the smartphone being stolen was the answer that, having a smartphone stolen was the main way in which people were losing their smartphones, then with breakage, and then losing the smartphone, and some had to sell it to make money. As we get to I just wanted to put that in there quickly. App usage. YouTube was number one, above WhatsApp, above Facebook, above the browser. And I think that's something as practitioners that is interesting, in that when we spoke to people about their phones, about the ways they use their phones, and my colleague does research on this, it was mostly what they wanted to talk about was how they were using it for entertainment. And I think that's in and of itself fascinating, but I don't have the time to talk more about that. So what does all of this mean, or how are we putting all of this together right now? So access to digital media isn't just about owning a device, having a smartphone, which is the device that most people associate with people experiencing homelessness just because it's portable. It's about the stability and instabilities of the access, the quality of the access. And ultimately, the way that we are framing it is that people don't just have a smartphone or don't have a smartphone, but that they are practicing connectivity, and that practice is resource intensive. So it might mean registering a SIM card, getting electricity, topping up credit, getting Wi-Fi, getting a device that has good enough quality to do certain things, losing your phone, being expected to be available. So all of these things are practices that people who are living in housing precarity are having to kind of put more resources into than people who are stably housed. And that means that smartphones are both a burden and an opportunity, with many mediating factors, such as income. So for example, for someone in Germany who is on the benefit system, it might be easier in the beginning of the month to buy a new smartphone if they have lost one than for someone who isn't receiving regular income. And there are other things such as age, which mean other variables, which we are looking at in terms of how they are affecting the resources that people have to expend into being connected. This digital divide theory is how media scientists often frame this, they almost put it like a hierarchy of needs in terms of access first, and then thinking about skills, and then thinking about outcomes. And the way that we are now framing it is that we think that housing status and housing precarity is a variable that massively influences the kinds of outcomes that people see from using digital media and from being connected. And I have a lot more things to say, but I think my time is out. So I will have the slides on certain digital solutions, so smartphone distributions, kind of the different kinds of apps that we've looked at. And thank you for listening.
Thank you, David, for your very interesting presentation and results from Berlin. I think that there are some other research exercises at local level, but we definitely need more information about the collection at a bigger scale, I think, to analyze the full scope of the digital exclusion. And related to these, and actually about this research, I can think of similar research that Solinum did in France some years ago, if I am right. And this is the perfect way to introduce my next speaker, Alice Deron from Solinum. Where is yours?
Thank you very much. So I present to you my So, yeah, what if digital was no longer a vector of exclusion, but of inclusion? What if digital technology could help reintegrate people into the streets? So, hi, my name is Alice, and I am the Innovation Manager of the Solinium Association. Today, 9 million people living in precarious situation in France. It is difficult for them to get information about the useful and accessible places, although there are more than 1 million non-profit organizations to help them. To put them in touch is vitally important. We believe in positive social innovation, which brings effective solution. Based on new and digital technologies, innovative tools can be developed to bring dignity to people in precariousness and promote their reintegration. So Solinium develops technological projects to reduce inequalities and fight poverty. We detect key issues, experiment with innovative solutions, and aim to spread them globally. This is why we developed SoliGuide, the mapping of solidarity. SoliGuide is above all a database, and I really insist on that today. Our main job is to build this database with quality data and above all to keep it up to date. The information is then made available through several media, website, soliguide.fr, an application, printable list, and online chat, where people can come and exchange with us there directly, and terminals interactive. The objective we have set ourselves to have information that is always up to date, to be able to filter quickly according to the characteristics of the person, woman, man, undocumented people, etc. Because precariousness is above all multiple realities with their specificities. Extensive data was also needed, not just day center or food distribution, with, for example, also with Wi-Fi points, library, public toilets, places of access to rights. So what we also need in the field is appropriate information, because 2 lines to orient are really not enough. We need to know the conditions of access to the structure, its timetables, its service, the languages spoken, nearby transport, etc. And finally, the point may still be the most difficult today. It is to have an ergonomics adapted to all the diversity of social action. So SoliGuide is freely accessible to all those who need it, both for beneficiaries, people in social difficulty or in integration, solidarity actors, communities. The product is translated into 7 languages, thanks to a community of committed volunteers for that. And now the product is available in 25 territories in France. So we have more than 23,000 places and 62,000 services referenced, and more than 1,500,000 searches this year. So we have therefore developed an API that allows any actor to connect to SoliGuide data for free and retrieve them in real time. So if I can capitalize on this experience and share lessons with you, I would say above all that a digital project is in reality often very little digital. We example, most of the work is not, as one might think, the development of our tech tools, but rather the animation of the network of local partners, the updating of information, since the databases require makes an attentive human follow-up. We have found that updating information is difficult to do automatically, and that it is necessary to manage and support all the players to have the best possible information. This is why the Sorry Guide is to offer as a tool at the service of social action and not the other way around. Sorry Guide will not revolutionize social social work, but we offer a product that is useful to them, and that translates into a process of permanent co-construction with all the stakeholders, both beneficiaries and volunteer social action professionals. We use what is called design thinking methods. We ask the opinion of users who know much better than us and constantly test and improve. So we have carried out studies and impact measurements. According to respondents, 87% saves time, 95% make their job easier, 98% trust in addition. Again, according to the stakeholders interviewed, Sorry Guide has a beneficial impact for beneficiaries. In effect, Sorry Guide would allow greater autonomy, would improve living conditions, and would facilitate the reintegration of beneficiaries. During this work, we frequently noted the difficulty in finding relevant, reliable, and time-monitored data on the medico-social sector. We were able to rely on data from our own tool, Sorry Guide, to support these studies. For these years, we are working on the Solidarity Data project. The Solidata project aims to make the wealth of data collected by Sorry Guide available to all actors carrying out studies and diagnoses, and to develop analysis, enabling local authorities to adapt their public policies and associations to adapt their activities to territorial needs. So to give concrete examples, we can create dashboards to facilitate the coordination of food aids during the summer months by identifying white areas in the territorial network, highlight the saturation of certain services with regard to the needs, or facilitate the implementation of policies by providing maps highlighting areas in need. So our goal tomorrow is to bring useful information to everyone living in poverty in France and beyond. So thank you for listening, and thank you.
Thanks to you, Alice, for letting us know more about the work of Sorry Guide, which is quite a powerful tool in France, like all over the territory, which is also quite demanding in terms of infrastructure, I can imagine. So yeah, congratulations for your work. And we can see that there are some questions already for the speakers. Please feel free to add your questions on the Q&A section or the chat section. We will answer all of them at the end of the round of interventions, just before starting the debate, if that's okay for you. And without further ado, I will give the floor now to Elina.
Hello, my name is Elina van der Boon. Let me first apologize because I have a cold and a bit of the flu. So if I'm not, if you can't hear me very well, just raise your hand, maybe I see it, and then I can try to speak a bit louder. Well, as I said, my name is Elina van der Boon and I work at the Regenbooggroep. This is an Amsterdam-based organization that helps homeless people, people with psychiatric problems, people with drug addictions, people with debts, asylum seekers, or people that are refugees, that have difficulties inserting in society, many groups. We help about 5,000 people a year in 9 day shelters for homeless people, where people can go have a meal, shower, clean clothes, that sort of thing, get a haircut, also get help from social workers. In a further 20 community centers, we have social workers that help people with all correspondence with the government, finding shelter or finding temporary housing, getting homelessness allocations for people, that sort of thing. We also have buddies for a buddy system where we help about 1,600 Amsterdam residents who do have a house, mostly, but they have psychiatric problems or addiction, and they are supported every week by a buddy. And also we have a program called Work and Participation, in which about 750 Amsterdam residents or people that are homeless gain experience in work by work-related projects, voluntary work, job training, and other activities. During the COVID pandemic, of course, we found ourselves in a difficult situation, like many organizations, like how to help people. And this was actually paralleled by the government being worried that the access to care for many people was not working anymore. They conducted a survey together with the Free University of Amsterdam on how people could get care through digital means. And not surprisingly, they came to the conclusion that this was especially difficult because of a lack of access to digital material, and also digital knowledge. In this survey, the conclusion was that about 20% of the Amsterdam society was not participating digitally at all. And of course, digital exclusion coincides with poverty, poor education, lower language skills, all the other factors that might contribute to being more marginalized or excluded. The situation in Amsterdam at the moment is that many people find it very difficult to get what they need because of this completely digital society which has excluded them. What I mean with this is that, for instance, if you want to have any communication with the government about your allowance, your job seekers allowance, for instance, or your allowance for care, or doesn't matter which provision by the government, it's all done online. It can only be done online. It's impossible to communicate with the government in any other way. You need to identify yourself which through a DigiD thing, which is called DigiD, and yeah, without this you cannot apply for any service from the government anymore. Same goes with banking. Most banks are closed, so when you want to do banking, it has to be done online. Children and need a computer in school, that sort of thing. Well, I think that I'm not saying anything really surprising. This exclusion is felt more by our clients. So people have no money to buy a device, and they have more difficulty in communicating with all the organizations that help them or the government. And another research in the University of Utrecht showed that in Dutch society, we ask the people that have the lowest incomes and the least skills to be most digital, because of how we have to ask for a job seekers allowance or that sort of thing. So basically, the more difficulties, social problems you have, the more difficult it also is to get online. What we decided was that we needed to start alongside our normal help that we provide for people, we also needed to start a new program which is called Iedereen Bereik, Access for All. And we took the recommendations of the research of Amsterdam seriously, and worked on digital property and through a holistic approach. What we did was that no matter where a client in our organization says that he or she does not have any access, automatically all the workers, about 250, they know that we have a central hub, which is called Honk, which is sort of like Hangout. They can apply for a device for that person. This device can be, of course, a laptop, it can be a smartphone, it can be a tablet, it can be whatever the person needs. And it always is connected with support, either through training or through a buddy who helps people. So depending on the situation of the person, people practice to use the device that they need, or they go together to ask for allowances by the government. For instance, the homelessness allowance, which is still in the Netherlands, it exists. And people, buddies, the peers, they help with applying for those. Also, what happens is that many people say, well, I need training, so about online safety, for instance, and then we provide the person also with training. Depending on the situation, and I found this very interesting, David, what you said about theft and that sort of thing, we provide people either with a laptop or a smartphone, mostly. Smartphones we distribute to homeless people, and laptops we provide to people that have a home or are in a temporary shelter or something, because we feel that smartphones are being stolen less than laptops. Of course, it's also easier when it rains or when someone sleeps rough. A smartphone you can protect more easily. So people get these devices in the first instance as a loan, and after a while, when officially the device has no value anymore, to say so to say, then people get it. This has to do with that people that get any allowance from the government, or when they are in a low income situation, people are not allowed to receive gifts. So we have made a loan system. Of course, people will ask, like, are these devices not stolen? Yeah, this sometimes happens, but also it does not happen all the time. So for the time being, the person has access to being online and getting all the things that they need. What kind of questions do people have? We've noticed that people use their smartphones or their laptops for the most basic things. So, for instance, a man who doesn't have a house, he's not entitled to any allowance by the government. He's not entitled to any shelter. This person has to seek for housing him or herself. This can only be done through apps at the moment, or on a website. Before, this person had to go to a community center to have access to a computer and there look at the houses and then apply for the houses, social housing. And now the person has a smartphone and can use the app provided by the government service for social housing, which is called Rooftop. There's lots of people that feel that they are vulnerable for online safety. So people look at bodies help with online safety. For instance, there was this person who was catfished by what he believed to be a woman from Indonesia, and that was very much in love with him, and he lost a lot of money, got into debt, and the buddy was helping to create more safe online behavior. Lots of homeless people, they use the smartphone for apps in the flash economy. So if you have these distributors of groceries, people, the general public in the Netherlands, they can get things delivered at home, groceries delivered at home. This is all delivered by people who work informally, who don't have an official contract. And a lot of homeless people in Amsterdam, they apply for these jobs through an app. This app, to be able to download it, you need a relatively new smartphone, because otherwise it's not being updated. And a lot of people say, okay, I need a smartphone just to find work, for instance. David, when you said that most people say that they need it for Facebook or YouTube or that sort of thing, this is also the case, but we also noticed that people use it for the most basic needs. I can't tell much more, but I wonder how am I for time? Maybe I should stop. I'm not sure, Sergio, how's it going?
Yeah,
sorry?
You could have 2 or 3 minutes more if you want to raise your final points.
So my final point is that we help about 150 people in a year with any device that they need, and with any help that they need. So if they come in a drop-in center and then they say, well, just help me install this app, then someone helps them installing an app. If someone wants a course, then they can do a course. If someone wants to learn how to send emails, then this can also be done. They get a buddy for a year. What I wanted to say was that, of course, we had lots of these projects already. But what is new is that at this moment, sort of like we overlaid it with a grid. Like, for instance, we also have an app where people can find where the shelters are. So a social map of Amsterdam, where people can find where all the shelters are and where you can shower and where you can get legal aid, etc. And since it is now all connected, people are helped better, we feel. The distribution of the devices is done according to anybody that has a need gets a new device. We get these devices, we buy them by getting funds, and then we buy them in bulk, cheaper. Also sometimes we get good quality second-hand laptops, for instance. They are refurbished in a work project of the Regenboog by people who have IT skills, and then they are redistributed. And then we make sure that they have a minimum amount of specs, so a certain amount of RAM, and otherwise it's still not working for them. This is what I wanted to tell you. Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much, Elena, for explaining more about the work that you're doing, which is also very very large, from devices distribution. You also have this app, which more or less similar to what Alice was saying. Yeah, we also have some questions in the chat. We will address them afterwards, but now we'll go with Dan and Daniel.
Hello. So I will begin for Hobo, and then Daniel will complete what I am saying. So hello, I'm Dan Vink. I work at a day center in Brussels. So we work with what David showed, the ethos light typology. So we work with the 50 partners that send people to Hobo, and they go from sleeping rough to having a housing, but still being accompanied by someone. So temporary shelters, everything in between. So about it's already a long time that Hobo considered that we had to do something about the digital divide. So the first thing, of course, we did was begin giving access. There was the first step was just okay. They need access to digital tools. So we provided computers at our center so they can go on internet, etc. It was already very immediately you sense there's also a real need to help them work with those tools, because you give them access, but there's also a lot of people that are not so digitally formed. So we began developing that also. And that's something important. That is, well, we are not a formal education center. So we are a day center. We have a lot of services that we provide for people, and the digital is not really our cup of tea at the beginning. So now we begin. We have a 10 years of experience in that domain, but it's important to tell this, because I think that if you talk about homeless people, if you talk about people in precarity, most of the organizations that touch those people are not organizations that are skilled in learning people things. So it's important to tell this, because, well, because of the day center that has a social status and a function, and it's not always compatible for if you want to find resources with formal learning ground. And the thing is about the people that come to Hobo, well, homelessness is never a good place to start learning things. It's not. If you want to learn things, you need a stable housing. You need to have. You need to be able to commit to the learning. So the way Hobo deals with this is that there's a lot that the people need to know, and so you're always working. You're not taking an ideal path of learning with our people. You go to what do they need right now, and how do we get there the fastest way possible. So the ateliers that Hobo gives are not high tech program skills, but are just using Gmail and using a Google Drive and using knowing how to fill in forms on the internet. So we really focus on those skills that can be of immediate use in their lives. Then again, and it's a contradiction, I know. Then again, if you want people to want to learn, you have to also address the fun part of the things they want to learn. So you have to show them why it can also be fun and not only an obstacle more to take. So that is it's a quite of a contradiction, because you have if you want to work with those people, you want them to learn it well, but you don't have the time, and you're also always in an urgency, and they are always in an urgency to learn as fast as possible. So you have to find some equilibrium between those two things. I think so we went from access to developing for educational courses for our people, to now we are also developing tools, but you have like I said before, we are not really an education center. So we still, it's always a social, in the first place, we are a social organization. So we have to team up with others to do this. It's not about, it's not we that have to change the society. The society has to develop things with us and to look what people in precarity need. So we have some collaborations now with public and corporate fundings like banks and mobile operators. It's called Digital. For the moment, we're very invested in that, where we develop a handy guide for other organizations that have not really an educational output normally, but see the need on the terrain and want to do something about it. I want to work with their people around digital, the acquirement of digital skills. Two of the outputs are, for example, that inspirational guide, but also a physical tool to help people give courses and to get the people to adhere to the course and to keep coming. I think to give you a scope of what Hobo of the amount of people Hobo touches, I think I dug up the numbers. I think in the last 3 years we had about 1,200 people, that unique participants that used the digital scope of Hobo. About 500 of them used our educational poll. The others, about 900, used just the access, having access to internet. And so a lot of what David told in the beginning, I can completely relate. People use smartphones and internet for the same reasons as us. How many of us are going on Facebook all the time or looking at YouTube? They need it for the same things. But they also need it to apply for a job, etc., etc. So about the smartphones, another thing, we began with computers. That was the first indicator. We wanted to give them access to a computer and to know how to work with a computer. Later on, the last 2-3 years, we developed a lot of. We saw that people are not most like David's number show. It's a bit the same here. There are a lot of people who have smartphones, and the numbers about losing them and having them stolen are correct also. So we developed, we saw that they used a lot of smartphones, so they use a lot of Android-based systems. And that's interesting because we were working on computer skills. But in the end, if we look at the usage of the smartphone, they use it for everything, for applying for jobs, for applying for houses. They use smartphone and an Android system for everything. So we developed, we give courses now on using Android-based systems. So it's important when you develop stuff like we do, and I'm going to give the word to Daniel, who will show all the different methodologies we put in place, that you go as close as possible to the user. Don't get them iPhones, or don't let them let them work with iPhones in your organizations or systems they will not use in their own life. If they use Android, go to Android. If they use smartphone, teach them smartphone. It's in the moment when they are in homelessness. It's not the moment for them to learn new systems. The moment is for them to have a pragmatic use of the systems they are already familiar with. So I'm going to give the word to Daniel, who will explain a bit about the different methodologies.
Okay, thank you, Dan. So we have different approaches to find solution for our people. So we started with so a few years ago we started with lessons. And we found that it was not the good response to them. So we offer now a different work groups, workshops where people can choose the team they want to work on. So, for instance, we have a job coaching at Hobo, and so we merge teams like Gmail and search a job on the internet. So that's a way to work. We like to work in groups, but we offer also the possibility to have individual coaching. So to find personal solution to work in a confidence atmosphere. So we have a different sets of tools, and we use it alternatively during the calendar of Hobo activities to satisfy as much people as possible. So we work also with NGOs that offer refurbished cell phones and computers. So the individual approach really helps people to find an appliance, a material solution. Also with mobile operators, there is a program named Internet for All, so we can register our people to help them to have a kind of modem, 4G modem, and so it's an extra device they can use for free for 2 years. So we have appliances connection, and so the knowledge around that can be developed at Hobo. So we are really focusing on the human factor approach. So that's important for people to feel at the center of our attention. So with extra project, European projects working on rights, we combine as much as we can. We try to put digital all around our activities. So Dan talk about the digital project, which is a very ambitious project with 2 outputs. We were in 2 dimensions of this big 1.5-year project, and so very soon we will have the final product of this project, and I'm ready to share so what we developed within the FEANTSA network. So you can rely on me to disseminate as much as we can the tools we develop in order to share, and so to let you discover what is innovating in the digital for destitute people. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you both.
Yeah. I just wanted Sergio, can I just add one thing? I think an important thing also is, well, Daniel, for example, is always, we have a big mobile part of our work. Not mobile in the sense we go to the streets and in the streets we're working on the digital skills, because that would be silly. But we go to a lot of other organizations that touches those people. And I think it's a very important thing to share, that if you want to create a place for people to come to develop this digital skills, in Brussels it won't work. And I think it would not be different in other places. For the people in homelessness, I think the best way to help them developing their skills is to go as close as possible to the places where they go every day. So having a network of other day centers where you can go and just put your laptops and your tablets and work with the people, that's the way to go. Going to homeless shelters in the evening and giving lessons there while they're there, I think that's the way of doing it, not by creating a center. So it's something Hobo develops also. That's a mobile solution with a bike and everything. But there's too much to say, so I'm going to zip it now. Thanks for your attention.
No, thanks to you, really, both Dan and Daniel, for presenting your important work. I think that what you said at the beginning, that of course you are not an education provider, but still you have to face these challenges and do work as good as possible to accommodate all these needs that people have. And I think that this could relate to the experience of many people in our audience, that they are not a formal education provider, of course, but still they need to provide some people skills. And yeah, without further comments, I will go to the questions that were asked in the chat. I think that the first one, because of the timing it was said, is for David. What outcome set is used to monitor progress in skills development?
So I wasn't 100% sure how that question was meant. So we're not doing like a survey again with the same people, so we can't really monitor progress development, if that's what they meant. We just did one point in time survey, that we do intend to do another one again, potentially in multiple cities. We did we do have like a digital skills index that we adapted from the digital divide literature. And we kind of adapted it to, so there's kind of one that was developed a few years ago and tested. We adapted that to better fit what people were telling us that they thought were relevant skills. So I think ultimately it was like something like 6, 7, or 8 questions on a Likert scale. And we will be publishing on that. Yeah, so hopefully within the next few months. I don't know if that answered the question. If it didn't, do feel free to type another question. I'm sorry.
Thank you, David, for your answer. Yeah, regarding the next questions, I think that they are addressed to FEANTSA, actually. So for both my colleague Simona and I. But since we are running a bit late, we will address them at the conclusions. Because we will have a little space for that. And now I give the floor to my colleague Simona.
Thank you, Sergio. Thanks, everyone. I hope you can hear me. It was very, very interesting to hear the latest updates from the ground, and very inspiring to learn about the work that you do across Europe. Just to remind everyone that FEANTSA has been maintaining an interest on digitalization in the past years. So I have put a link in the chat to our paper from last year, where we look at the benefits and the challenges that people experiencing homelessness face when trying to become more digitalized, to say so. And an important thing that we also work on always is bringing these information, these inputs that we get from people from the ground to the European level. And I think the next panel will also contribute a lot to this discussion. We're looking forward to hear from people who have been involved in shaping policies at the EU level, at national level, perhaps. So I will, without further comments, go to the discussions. And just to remind everyone that we are joined today by Elisa Lironiv, who is a program director at Citizen Action Service, the European Citizen Action Service, by Claire Fernandez, the executive director of European Digital Rights, and Benjamin Ignac, who is a public policy expert in tech policy and human rights, and also a Romani activist who graduated from University of Oxford. So we are looking forward to hear from you. What are your experiences? And I will just kick off the discussion with the first question, allowing you to introduce your own work. Tell us about what work have you been doing in this area recently, and also asking you to reflect on what you heard from the presentations before you, and how do you think that EU or national policies, for that matter, address the issue of social exclusion in digitalization? So maybe we can start with Elisa, please, if you will.
Okay, thank you very much, Simona. Thank you, Sergio. I hope everyone can hear me. First of all, I would really like to thank you for inviting me. I think I feel very, very humbled after hearing all of these practitioners really on the ground in their daily lives, working for the homeless people. And I feel like that their contribution is so great. And sometimes we work on the EU level and we just seem so far from people in our work, but I hope that we can give a contribution in a different way through more advocacy for both the civil society sector and also for people in general. So my name is Elisa, and as Simona said, I'm the program director for European democracy in an NGO based here in Brussels that has been for more than 30 years actually empowering citizens to exercise their rights in the EU. My expertise lies really in digital democracy. So basically how citizens can really interact with governments through e-government services, e-transparency, and especially e-participation. So what I work in is really on how citizens can really contribute more to policymaking processes, not only during elections, but really also in the 5 years between elections, how they can actually contribute more to decision-making processes. So last year, there was a coalition of civil society organizations that was created with more than 80 civil societies all across Europe. And this coalition was created because when Ursula von der Leyen, the president of the Commission, launched the Conference on the Future of Europe, which is this gigantic transnational participatory democracy exercise that took place this year for a year with Citizens' Assembly, civil society felt like we didn't have a say in neither the process or on the policy making that would happen through the Conference of the Future of Europe, which is mainly between citizens and institutional actors. And we thought civil society could give a big contribution to this. So we created this coalition, and in this coalition, we divided also certain working groups into different sectors. And the one that I was leading was the digital transformation one. So actually we collaborated so well with also FEANTSA, but also other NGOs that were in this working group. For example, Defend Europe, the European Disability Forum, the European Union of Federalists, the European Anti-Poverty Network, ALDA, Solidar, etc. So it was really, really a good collaboration of not only digital experts, but people who were looking for digital inclusion, which I think is the biggest challenge of the digital transformation that is happening here in Europe and will be happening for the next decades for sure. So through this process, we had crowdsourcing, mainly a platform in which we were basically gathering all these contributions from civil society on 5 main topics. And the topics were digital democracy, digital economy, digital safeguards, digital freedoms and rights, and digital education. So from here, we basically first collected all of these inputs from civil society organizations. And then with this working group of around 15 organizations, we came up with the recommendations. And with these recommendations, I actually was in Strasbourg in the working group with institutional actors and also with citizens to really push for what civil society has been calling for on these different topics. And it was a very, very interesting exercise. I'll give my key takeaways in the end of my intervention. First of all, I just wanted to give you a brief overview of what these recommendations were. In general, we were talking about digital transformation. So for example, in digital democracy, we could realize already that the main challenges amongst all 5 of the topics were mainly ensuring accessibility and ensuring inclusiveness. This was a theme that came constantly from all civil society organizations. that the digital transformation will be a challenge if we don't ensure both accessibility and inclusiveness. And this was really interesting because it was a strong message that we brought to the institutional actors. For digital democracy, so I won't go too much into the technicalities. There's a report which is publicly available. But on digital democracy, it was interesting that we all proposed to make the internet a fundamental right. So basically access to free, equal, affordable internet, a fundamental right for EU citizens. So everybody living in the EU, and also this was inspired by what is happening in Finland, where it is a fundamental right, and we think that this should be happening in all countries. And then, so this was actually brought to the Conference of the Future of Europe, and they actually took it on board in their final policy proposal that would go to the institutions. Then, of course, there were other very, very important discussions around public services, so e-government services that are fully accessible. This means also funding and collaborating more with civil society that can support those that are currently excluded in the digital transition. So this was a really important point, that the fact that we think that civil society organizations are really mediators between people and institutions. And without civil society, it is also very difficult for only institutional actors to support these excluded groups. So there definitely should be more resources for civil society to actually support the digital transition and make sure that no one is left behind. So I will just go quickly through the other ones because they're more technical. But when we talk about digital economy, there was again a strong message about digitally supporting excluded groups with funds, resources, and digital transition programs. And we think that when we target certain parts of society, we really need to be giving priority to these excluded people and to these people that are left behind due to inaccessibility and unavailability of technologies, or also because they lack connectivity and digital skills. So as you can see, there was this constant thread of us pushing really for the vulnerable groups to have priority now in the next decades in this digital transition. And then on, well, rights and freedoms online and on safeguards, the policies were more about protecting people when they're on the internet. So making sure that their privacy is protected, that, you know, they're not victims of phishing, that there is no facial recognition technologies, things like that. So I'm not going to go, as I said, into detail, but here it was.
If you could, sorry, Elisa, if you could wrap it up in 1 minute.
Yeah, in 1 minute. Okay, so this was also really about protecting them, which is not actively about the citizen, but it's more about from the policy perspective, how can we protect people when they are online, which is also extremely important. And then the last one was around digital education, which is also around the lack of access to digital education. And when we talk about education, it's not only about formal education, but especially about non-formal education and the understanding that people don't have to learn about digital education during formal education, but there are many, many different ways for them to be in these programs. And these programs should be also EU funded and also have civil societies as a mediator that can also teach these skills. So I just wanted to give 3 last takeaways. So what I think from all the discussions that I heard are 3 takeaways from my experience is that, first of all, when I went to the conference on the future of Europe, it was really interesting how most MEPs and institutional actors were giving a lot of importance on gender. So when we talked about digital transition, they were thinking a lot about women and make sure women are not left behind and make sure that, you know, maybe some seniors. So I went there actually putting our message there, saying that that's not only the group that we should be targeting. Vulnerable groups are much more than just, you know, a gender based discussion. It's also about refugees, homeless people, people with disabilities. And I was really happy that in the end, by insisting, they actually broaden the definition of those that are digitally excluded. So I would say that my first message is really recognition of the fact that homeless people are really excluded in society from this digital recognition. The second one is simply about, and this has been already discussed, accessibility and skills. And I think that with accessibility, it's important to give complementary tools to people. So make sure that they know that digital is maybe a way for them to find a job, but not only. There may be like complementary offline ways, forms, and things like that that can help them. And with skills, I think that there should be a much more holistic approach, because digital education is not everything. It goes together with financial education, civic education, and all of the other education. So I can understand that some people are frustrated through digital skills because then they're lacking a lot of other things that they should be learning in parallel. And the last but not least, I think we need more resources as civil society organization, and especially from what I've heard from the discussion, more collaboration and communication, because definitely we're not talking enough to each other in order to help each other. Because if these shelters are lacking experts that can teach homeless people digital skills, then we, for example, at ICAS are organizations that can provide this as well. But since we don't communicate to each other, it's also difficult to collaborate.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Elisa. I think that reflects very well what we've also called for in the recommendations, and we are looking forward to see what happens with the conference on the future of Europe, as it was a huge exercise of consultations. But time is running on us, so I will just go straight to Claire. Claire, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and try to be brief, but thank you so much for having me. This is really a great learning exercise. I think because mainly as a network, as EDRI, at European level, we don't necessarily look specifically at digital exclusion. We tend to look at privacy and surveillance angles of technologies and how that impacts groups, but not necessarily paying a deliberate attention as to issues of access and affordability and connectivity. However, at national level, and specifically some of EDRI members are looking at these intersections. We have, for example, in the Czech Republic, EDRI members, URE, running a campaign on the rights to analog because of, in the deployment of access to public services through digital technologies. This is leaving, as you know, many behind. We also have many EDRI members who are looking at pieces of legislations, laws and policies that would further exacerbate digital exclusion, and in particular, those looking at electronic identity. And happy to talk about that a little bit later. And then, of course, what we've also attempted to do is, I think, as Elisa has alluded to, we're trying to look more at the intersections of marginalization and digitalization, and especially at the disproportionate impact of digital rights violations on marginalized groups, including sex workers, Roma and Sinti groups, and others. And really there, the priority and the exercise has been to depart from there, the issues that those groups face that are exacerbated through the use of technologies like racial profiling or exclusion to begin with. So trying to phrase and decenter the technology aspect to really focus on what are the issues, and of course technologies can amplify that. So just to add on some reflections as well, and link to some of the issues we focus on, I think there are two concerns for us is pieces of legislation initiative that would further exacerbate digital exclusion, and those use of technologies that lead to additional surveillance and criminalizations of homeless people and people on the move and people in vulnerable situations. So on the exacerbation, we see the EDAS regulation, so the new regulation proposed by the European Commission on electronic identity, where the aim would be that by 2030, most of the electronic ID and eID systems are used in access for most services online across the EU. And we know that these systems would only work with newer smartphones, for example, and that even the European Commission recognized that their target will be will actually lead to about 80% of coverage, which means that 20% of the population would still be excluded from these technologies and uses. In addition, of course, to risk of tracking and privacy concerns that we have, I think it would be really important also for groups working on homelessness to really look at the impact of this regulation on homeless people. The same would be true for another proposal from the European Commission that's aimed to combat the dissemination of child sexual abuse online, the so-called CSAR regulation, which is, of course, a very laudable goal, but has a lot of unintended consequences. And one of them would lead to age verification systems that actually assume that everyone, in order to use messaging apps and others, would have an identification means, and would lead to use of technologies that would exclude because they need a new smartphone or rely on electronic identification. And that would apply not just in access to social benefits and to services, but in all service providers and messaging options would be targeted by this new regulation. So this is something that we have on our radar, and welcome to tell you more if interested. And then finally, we also see direct and active surveillance and criminalizations of homeless people, but also people on the move and marginalized groups, and those are the intersections. Being, for example, through algorithmic surveillance of drivers and gig workers. And I think, Elina, you alluded to that in the Amsterdam context, but we know that we've seen specific targeting of racialized groups or people, homeless people especially, being targeted by algorithms and recognitions through the use of these technologies. And there are some groups like the ADCU, the App Drivers and Courier Union in the UK, that started litigating against Ubers on this surveillance. We also see facial recognition being used as against people loitering in public parks, but we actually know that the intent and the impact is clearly to clear parks from rough sleepers or migrants, undocumented migrants, and that was the case in Italy. So we're running a big, campaign on banning what we call biometric mass surveillance. And there are really here parallels between the hostile architecture, like spikes on benches that would prevent people from sleeping and accessing public spaces, to new forms of technologies that are also used as a way to deter people using public spaces and to just keep people moving. And then finally, in the AI Act, the Artificial Intelligence Act of the European Commission proposing, we're also trying to see and propose a ban on some of the most harmful uses of these systems, including in access to public services, where algorithms and very often discriminatory and illegal algorithms have been used in order to detect, for example, fraud in accessing benefits, or would really be an obstacle in the free access of people to their rights. And I wanted to also ask the question to Elina, who was referring to how smartphones are being used to communicate with the governments in relation to accessing benefits. We know that in the Netherlands, there's been various numbers of scandals when it comes to child benefits. So I also wondering if, you know, as a way to get remedy, and if you think you're being wrongly accused of fraud, for example, if you do not hold a smartphone or has a way to communicate and answer back, I think it's also hindering access to justice for this group who have been wrongly targeted on discriminatory grounds. So I'll just finish by that. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you, Claire. Maybe, Elena, if you could answer that after the last intervention from Benjamin, just to make sure that everybody gets their time. And also to our audience, please bear with us. As usual, we are going to run a bit late. But I think it's very interesting also to have the perspective from Benjamin, who is also going to talk to how Roma communities have been impacted by digitalization, and we all know that housing situation for Roma is needs to be improved. And yeah, during the pandemic, there were also lots of things happening. So Benjamin, please.
Thank you very much. So yeah, my name is Benjamin. I am a Romani activist and technologist. I graduated in 2020 from Oxford with a public policy degree focusing on tech policy. And I worked at the Open Society Foundations for a year and a half, focusing on, the goal was to assess how OSF can include digital inclusion in the thematic priorities of their Roma NGO beneficiaries. And there is a lot of Roma NGOs across Europe focusing on a variety of Roma rights issues, but digital rights not so much, or digital inclusion for that matter. I would like to maybe highlight 3 issues relevant to this debate. The first one is, before talking further, Roma people are the biggest and most scattered minority in the European continent, also experiencing the most socioeconomic exclusion. For example, 90% of the Roma population live under the poverty line. So you can imagine that the digital exclusion follows the same suit. On average, we know that in the European Union, 90% of the households have access to the internet. With the Romani households, it is twice as low. Digital exclusion is quite rampant. That's the first point that I want to make. The second point is about the policy initiatives. So what does the EU do to kind of alleviate this digital exclusion? We know that there is the 10-year action plan for Roma inclusion, which the European Commission has proposed 7 different objectives with targets for these objectives at the EU level for the period until 2030. But the problem around this is that digital inclusion is not explicitly included in these 7 objectives. The only mention of digital skills appears under objectives, for example, under education. It says to promote for Roma pupils and their teachers the acquisition of digital skills and digital infrastructure for distance learning. And this is in response to COVID, for example, when this need was made visible. But explicitly, it's not a major objective, one of the 7, and it's not necessarily, if you look at the indicators for implementing these objectives, I could not find any indicators that would measure the targets related to digital inclusion. So it's more like a nice to have than a full objective. So I don't think they're necessarily being tackled by EU initiatives. Also, these EU initiatives the action plans are not necessarily, so they have moral and political significance, but they're not necessarily legally binding. So it's up to the member states to which extent they're going to follow these recommendations, etc. So that's on the EU level. From the more activist civil society level, I would say that digital rights as the field in the European Union is also in a way a bit exclusive to Roma communities and Roma NGOs, Roma actors. For example, all of these coalitions we were talking about today and initiatives, how many Roma NGOs were actually part of them, how many of these platforms were made accessible to Roma NGOs, Roma actors, Roma activists who want to solve these problems at the EU level. I don't think that there has been many collaborations with the Roma civil society organizations, which is a bit ironic because as I started talking, Roma people are the biggest and most excluded national minority in Europe. And, you know, they suffer from the digital exclusion, statistically speaking, but also in practice. Like, you have the data, you have everything available, but then there's still some kind of a barrier which needs to be merged. But yeah, I don't want to take too much time. I would like to maybe answer questions rather than talk.
Thank you, Benjamin. I think we hear you, and we are happy to have you here today. In general, to include the Roma communities in our discussions. We are supposed to finish the webinar, but like I said, we're going to take a few more minutes. Elena, if you wanted to address the question from before, and then if anyone else has any question from the panelists as well, this is a chance to come in.
Yeah, I would like to answer Claire, but I'm also not really sure how to answer her, not very negatively. Lots of people have had problems with child support allocation, and they were definitely, this is proven, they were targeted because of their name not being Dutch enough, or because they were born in another country. But in general, these problems, these people face so many more problems than not having a smartphone, for instance, at the moment. What happened is that many people were kicked out of their houses. Lots of people lost the responsibility over their children. So children were placed by a government facility in another foster home or something like that. People had debts, so bailiffs came to the house and took everything, amongst which also telephones. And now, to be able to get your money back and to get justice, you need to refer yourself to the same government, to a social worker from the government, to get justice. And people are now still waiting for getting their money back. The problem is not just how to be digital or how to use the apps to get in contact with the government. No, most people do have a social worker, or they do have legal aid, but it still takes the government, they said, a few more years to decide on each individual case whether their rights were met or not. So people are still sitting in a hopeless situation. Yeah.
Thank you for that, Elena. Anyone else would like to raise a question at this time from the panelists? Or add anything? Okay. Otherwise, I think as we have reached the time for closing the webinar, I will address the question from Alessandro, who was written in the Q&A section, which is to FEANTSA team, if we have a working group to share these kind of practices and ideas between organizations. And I think it's a great point that Alessandro is making, that we would need a common European space where we could exchange more and keep in touch. Unfortunately, we don't have that at the moment in FEANTSA, but what we are doing is that we are collecting information and making it available on our website. So after this event, we will send around an email with the recording of the event, and also a link to our Flash, which is the FEANTSA newsletter coming out every month. We invite you to subscribe there to get all the news on our work, including digitalization. And we hope that in the future we will have more resources to allocate for this important conversation. Thank you everyone for your contributions today. I think it was great to have your questions from the public as well, and your comments. And like I said, we will follow up with an email making the recording available and please feel free to get in touch for further suggestions or questions. Thank you all for your contributions. Sergio?
Thank you everyone for, well, first of all, the panelists for your great interventions, and secondly to the audience joining us here today. And yeah, I hope that you find all the interventions very relevant and you have plenty of food for thought.